Apple's exploring adding AI search engines to its default Safari web browser. Shares of Alphabet taking a hit on the report. And Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley is here with more. Dan.
That's right. This is from Eddy Cue. This is from the antitrust trial that's going on with regards to Google's search monopoly that they've been found guilty of having. And so Eddy Cue is there. Google and Apple have a $20 billion deal where Google is the default search engine for the Safari browser and other things throughout Apple's ecosystem. At $20 billion a year goes into Apple's services. It's a large chunk of change for Apple. Just to give you context, in 2024, services brought in $96.1 billion. So $20 billion of that seemingly comes from the Google deal. But for Google, it's an even bigger issue because Q had also said that in April was the first time that the company had seen a decline in searches on Safari, and so that would seemingly translate to a decline in Google searches for the first time on their platform. And so he mentions how they want to keep using Google search. They don't want to get rid of it as the default because of that deal, but that Apple is exploring adding different generative AI search options, and some of the ones that come to mind, obviously, they do have a deal with ChatGPT already as part of the Apple Intelligence Platform, OpenAI, but they could also look at stuff like Perplexity, which is another generative AI search engine. And so this kind of coming together at a time when Google's entire kind of empire is facing threats from the search side to the ads side, and then this discussion of this drop in traffic really leads you to believe that perhaps there's more going on behind the scenes with Google than we've previously thought, or it could just be that we're starting to see that shift for people going over to the kind of generative AI search that has really come forward, and it's the reason why ChatGPT shot up so quickly when it was first introduced. People are interested in this technology. There are other options out there. OpenAI has ChatGPT search. Perplexity is another option. Google does have its own generative AI search, by the way. It's AI overviews. They also have an AI mode that's more akin to what you would get from GPT search. Microsoft also has something along those lines with its Copilot search. But I think obviously ChatGPT, they got out there with first mover advantage. Perplexity is building up over time. And so it really does stand to reason that they could become major threats to Google's biggest product, which is search.
It's amazing, Dan, because if this wasn't a Fed day, I think this story would be getting even more attention. Mm-hmm. I mean, the move in Alphabet today, that's a huge move for that company and unusual. And when you have, according to these reports, Apple's Eddy Cue, Apple's head of services, longtime Apple veteran, is saying searches on Safari dipped for the first time last month. And apparently he attributes that to people using AI, and that he thinks AI search providers, the OpenAIs, the Perplexities, the Anthropics, they're going to at some point replace standard search engines like Google. I mean, this is something we've talked a lot about. This has been the big existential worry for Google, that AI is going to come here and just upend and redefine Google's bread and butter. And I feel like investors, they saw these headlines today from Eddy Cue, and I think a lot of investors seem to think like, whoa, that is a big data point from a big important source.
And can I just say, at the same time that the government is trying to get Google to separate its businesses, right? And so if it's not going to have the other stuff, and is just going to have to rely on the search business, and the search business is in secular decline, or listen, this is a leap, right? It's not yet.
Yeah.
But that's
What did you make, Dan? I thought this was interesting. Here was a Gene Munster, longtime tech analyst. Here's what he wrote on X. He said, the bull case now depends on convincing yourself that despite everything we've seen and heard from Eddy Cue, Google is suddenly going to flip a switch and figure out how to solve for a world beyond 10 blue links.
It's interesting because when you look at Google's AI mode, which they're still in testing, there are no blue links. It's no longer that list. It's similar to the Anthropics, that chat interface that you see on these different search products. And so there are bits of what you would recognize from Google, some pop-ups for if you look for a restaurant, it'll show you the location in Google Maps on the side and some reviews, but it carries over that kind of, here's my question, here's the response from the chat. That's obviously not the main Search right now, it's still very much in testing. You need to opt into it. So it's not as though that's taking over yet. And again, they still have AI overviews. I'm looking at a quick reaction from Justin Patterson from KeyBank saying that search volumes being pressured. It's not necessarily new information, but I think the market reaction is really about this Google-Apple relationship. And then if people are moving over to these other options, then what does that mean for Google's long-term sustainability? And so it's also worth noting that there's still trillions of searches on Google every year. It's not going away anytime soon. There's a reason why we Google things, right? But
and the bulls would say, Dan, Google, listen, they've got the infrastructure, the data analytics, the ad tech, no easy things to quickly mimic.
But I think there's been this narrative that Google's search is no longer what it once was, right? Like it's not giving you exactly what you want, and so I think that maybe you have that narrative going. You have these new entrants. It's kind of the basically a perfect storm of kind of conversation going on around Google and Google search. And so does that then mean that we'll start to see people move over en masse to these other offerings? Google's trying to stop that. What was the big news when ChatGPT came out? Google was caught flat-footed, right? And so they had to rush. They released Bard, which had its own issues at first. Then they renamed that Gemini. They have by the way, Gemini is also a bot that they have, a chat bot that they have that you can do search with. So it has these three disparate elements going on that take advantage of the same models. But AI overview, then you have AI mode, then you have Gemini. They need kind of a more cohesive approach, I feel, and that's what's being offered from some of these other folks.